This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John Blake.
And I'm Evan Grant. We're going to do something a little different in this episode of our spinoff of the Dallas Morning News SportsDay Insider podcast and spend a little extra time with our very special guest.
Fans know Tom Grieve as Mr. Ranger, and as long as I've been around the club, Tom has been around here for even longer. He spent 55 seasons with the franchise in Washington and Texas before retiring after the 2022 season.
Hey, before we get into Tom, make sure to check out some of our previous episodes if you're new to the show. Last week, we talked to former Rangers pitcher and 20-year big league veteran Darren Oliver. We've talked to Michael Young, Mark Teixeira, Rusty Greer, and current Ranger Jake Berger.
And if you want to interact with the show, you can find each of us on X. I'm at Ranger Blake, and Evan is at Evan_P_Grant.
You can also reach us on the Dallas Morning News on any of the paper's social media channels. And again, find the podcast in the SportsDay Insider feed wherever you like to consume podcasts. If you've got any comments or thoughts, you can email me at egrant@dallasnews.com. Send us questions if you'd like, and we can answer a few of them on the air.
Bottom of the ninth, bases loaded. Here comes Jimmy Dale from Baker Brothers Plumbing, AC, and Electrical.
Thanks, Chuck. When your home pitches curveballs, Baker Brothers knocks it out of the park.
Home run, Baker Brothers. Incredible.
As the official home service partner of your Texas Rangers, we're offering $300 off a tank or tankless water heater.
Another winning call. Visit callbakernow.com or dial 214-342-1171 today.
Baker Brothers.
Great service.
So we're going to get started. Tom, thanks for joining us today for this our little podcast here. We're enjoying doing this and just talking to different former Rangers and we've done Jake Berger too, but just some of the memories and stories. And you're going to have a lot of those, having spent 55 years with this organization. And just a little bit of quick stuff on Tom. 1966, he was the first-round pick of the Washington Senators. He made his debut with the Senators in 1970, then played in Texas from 1972 to 77, finished out with the Mets and the Cardinals, went into the front office in 1980, first in group sales and in player development, and became the youngest GM in Major League Baseball at the time at 36. 1984, was a GM for 10 years, and then a 28-year run as a broadcaster, which is the second longest in club history to Eric Nadel, and a 2010 inductee into the Texas Rangers Hall of Fame. So, Tom, welcome in.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I was just thinking back to call-in shows I used to do back in the mid-'80s and how much different the technology is today than it was back then.
Well, I don't think we'll be as tough as Randy Galloway was in those days anyway. So I'm just going to get it started. And Evan and I have talked. We're just going to kind of do a little scatter shooting here on different memories you have. And I'm going to go start at the beginning. So your first major league manager when you were called up to the big leagues was Ted Williams. And then you played for Ted, also the first year here in Texas in 1972. And you were a Yankee fan growing up, but still the aura of playing for someone like Ted Williams had to be pretty amazing.
Well, I was a Yankee fan. Mickey Mantle was my favorite player. The rest of my family were Red Sox fans, and Ted Williams was their favorite player. Every time we went to a doubleheader in either Fenway or Yankee Stadium, it seemed like Mickey Mantle went 0 for 4 and Ted Williams went 3 for 4. When I got a chance to, but I was also a huge baseball fan. I collected baseball cards. I read the Springfield, Massachusetts Union every morning at 6:30, the box scores, the averages, and all that. So I was a huge fan. And I've always felt, and I've said a few times, that it was a drawback for me to play for Ted Williams because I was in such awe of him that I was intimidated. I didn't really feel comfortable talking to him. I avoided him just because I was so nervous around him. And I think if I didn't know anything about baseball, didn't know who Ted Williams was, it would have made my transition to the big leagues much easier.
One of your other managers early on in your career was Billy Martin. And Evan laughs at me because I'm big on the turnaround gang in 1974, but it was kind of a watershed moment in this franchise's history. You won 57 games the year before, and you were in the race the next year with the A's right down to the end. So tell us a little bit about that 1974 season and then playing for Billy.
Well, it started in 1973 at the end of the season when Whitey Herzog was fired and Billy Martin was hired. Whitey was here to build for the future, to develop young arms and young talent. And what we did that year really wasn't the bottom line for Whitey Herzog and the Rangers until Billy Martin became available and Bob Short, our owner, who was desperately looking to fill the seats and make some money, decided to hire Billy. And the philosophy of the team completely changed from building for the future in a sensible way to winning right now. And Billy had done that before in Minnesota. He'd done it in Detroit. And his first meeting in 1973, he called the team together and he said, I didn't come take this job because I wanted you guys to be a 500 team. I came here because we're going to win next year. And if anyone here doesn't believe that, doesn't want to be here, come into my office after the meeting and I'll make sure you're not here tomorrow. Obviously, we were all glad to be in the big leagues and we didn't do that. But I think on occasion we did look at each other and say, if he thinks we're going to win next year, he must never have seen our team play because we're just not ready to win. But the team made a trade for Fergie Jenkins. Fergie won 25 games. Jim Bibby won 19 games. Jeff Burrows was the MVP. Mike Hargrove and Jim Sundberg were rookies. Mike was the rookie of the year. Sonny made the all-star team. We had a good team, and it still wasn't a team that should have won whatever we won that year, 84 games, 85 games. But Billy was by far the best manager I ever played for. And every one of us to a man felt, all things being equal, going into a game, we would win the game because Billy was a better manager than the other team's manager. So between the lines, from the time one game started to the time that game ended, to me, he was the best manager. He should be in the Hall of Fame. But he had his problems from the time the game ended until the next one started, and they've been well chronicled, and he wasn't able to maintain a relationship with the team for a long time. But for the year and a half or 2 years he joined a team and was with them, that team generally won.
But what I think, one thing, I don't think anything in baseball has changed quite as much as the position of manager over the last 50 years. And it used to give you more of a, I guess, competitive advantage. And now I think so much is done by rote or by modeling or script, whatever you want to say. I think the value of manager is in a different role. But two-part question here, right? So what made Billy such a great manager? Was it particularly strategy or was it communication? And the second part is, look, I mean, I think you've seen how the manager's role has changed, and you've sat in on manager interviews all the way up until Bruce Bochy came here. So I'm curious what you feel like is how the position has changed.
Well, Billy definitely was a communicator. There's no doubt about that. He was fearless as a manager, and he needed to be in control. He was a brilliant tactician. Back in the days, mid-70s, back then, most of us didn't even think that a walk was a positive occurrence. It was like a break-even kind of thing. No one talked about on-base percentage, let alone all the analytical statistics that we have today. But Billy was well in tune to that, just like Earl Weaver was. Billy was big on base percentage. He didn't talk about on base percentage, but Toby Harrah and Mike Hargrove each were on base percentage guys, hit for high average, got a lot of walks. They hit at the top of the lineup. He was an excellent tactician, but he was a tremendous communicator. You felt like you could not stand to lose. No one I ever played for or knew wanted to win more than Billy Martin. After a game one time, I was the first one back in the clubhouse after a tough loss, and I walked by the middle of the clubhouse, and I reached down and grabbed a potato chip, and unfortunately, Billy was right behind me, and he started screaming, "Stick your face in that food. If I played like you guys, I couldn't eat for a week." And he just went on, and I just wanted to disappear. I figured my days with the Rangers were over. and I just waited with my breath held until the next day. And instead, he came up to me and he had like a little smirk on his face. And he said, "Hey, look, don't take that personal. You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Um, I sometimes have to blow off steam and deliver a message to the team, and you were the guy I did it through." Another time I can remember sitting on the bench, I was being platooned. I was only playing against left-handed pitchers. We'd faced a bunch of right-handed pitchers. I'd never had him come up to me in the dugout, and he came up on the dugout to me in the dugout during the game, and he said, "Look, I know you haven't played for a while, but we're going to Oakland, and Kenny Holtzman and Vida Blue are pitching, two left-handed pitchers. We're right in this thing. We have to have a good series there, and you're going to be a big part of it. I'm counting on you, so you make sure you're ready for those games." And he had a knack of doing that. That wasn't just something that he singled me out for. That's the way he managed the team. And he did it in a way that just made you want to go out there and perform. You try as hard as you can in every game, but if it's possible to try even harder than that, you did it when Billy Martin was a manager.
Tom, when your playing career ended, did you want to go into baseball operations?
When I first started off as a player and we moved to Texas, the last thing I ever thought in my life was that I would live in Texas. My wife and I were both from New England. I assumed I would finish school, maybe go back and teach and coach or, whatever it might be, but I never anticipated playing in Texas. But the longer you play, the more your friends are in baseball, the more you're close to your teammates, the more you meet fans, you meet neighbors. And so after a while, we both loved Texas. Our kids grew up here. I wanted to stay in Texas. And as my career was getting to where I could kind of see the finish line, I started to think what I would want to do. Eddie Robinson was the general manager at the time. He had actually scouted me when I was in high school, so I knew him. And he called me aside one day and he said, "Look, I think you'll someday be an excellent front office person." And he actually said this, maybe even a general manager. So I think you should think about that. And one day he and Brad Corbett had me up in their office after the season, the last game of the season, offered me a job and group ticket sales and a chance to stay in baseball in a different way. My kids were young, my career was not flourishing, and I just thought it was important to think of my family, stay in the same place, let them establish themselves in their schools and try a different career path. And that's kind of how it happened. And I can't say I planned for it at all, but I kind of feel like it worked out for the best that way.
And you started in group sales, as you said. You got to deal with Clayton Moore and the Lone Ranger in that job. And then you spent 4 years in player development, leading up to your appointment as general manager in September of 1984. And even with the experience you have, I was coming on board at essentially the same time as Tom took this job. You were reluctant at the time to take the role that you would spend close to a decade in. What were your feelings going? And you were not walking in to the most functional situation. I will say that. The manager, Evan, at that time was Doug Rader, who actually reported to the club president, didn't report to the general manager. So, what were your feelings like, when Joe Klein got let go and they wanted you to take over his job?
Well, Mike Stone was the president of our team at the time. Mike was a brilliant guy, a management training kind of guy, not a baseball guy. He wanted to make a change at general manager, and he liked me, and he thought that I could do that job. I felt like I was just beginning to understand and learn how to be a farm director and a minor league director. To do that, you have to kind of be a farm director for a year because at different months of the year, different things happened. And I had done it, I'd had 2 cycles, I guess, and I felt pretty comfortable doing it. The other thing I was painfully aware of is that in baseball, you are somewhat insulated as a scout, a farm director, but you're not insulated as a general manager. And it wasn't that long since I had made the decision to go into front office work when my family was my number one priority and we loved it here and wasn't making a lot of money at the time, didn't have a lot of money. We had just bought a house. And so in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, all right, if I take this job, we've got a terrible organization, we got a terrible team, we've got a brutal farm system. The forecast for me as a general manager is not rosy. And so if I do take the job and I last 1 or 2 years, then what happens? So it was kind of self-preservation that I felt like I wanted to stay in the farm department. But Mike wouldn't take no for an answer. And I ended up as the general manager. And believe me, it was a lot of on-the-job training.
I think you made two significant hires, though, that probably cemented your tenure there. First was Sandy Johnson right away in that fall, and then Bobby Valentine in May of 1985. And that was kind of probably the turning point for you, right? And be able to say, I think I can do that if I have these kind of guys working with me.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is, at the time I became general manager, for the Rangers anyway, the general manager was also the scouting director. So the general manager ran the big league team, and technically he ran the scouting department and made the draft choices. Someone said you need to interview Sandy Johnson. And I didn't know Sandy. I knew he'd been with the scouting bureau. So I did. We hired Sandy. And I've told Sandy this. I've told John's heard me say this 100 times. I've said it a lot of times when I speak. The only reason I was a general manager for 10 years was because of Sandy Johnson. Sandy Johnson brought in Louis Rosa, who might go down as the most prolific scout in the history of baseball. And while Sandy and Louis were doing their thing, we signed Juan Gonzalez, Pudge Rodriguez, Sammy Sosa, Wilson Alvarez, Ray Sanchez, and a host of other major league players. And as I looked at that team, we didn't quite win, but we had good players. I mean, we had Raffy, Pudge, Ruben Sierra, but none of that happens without Sandy. So you're right, John. That was by far, I'll say it was a little bit lucky, because if the first guy accepted the job, it wouldn't have been Sandy. But it turned out to be my best decision. And then Mike Stone said to me, I want you to hire the manager. Eddie Childs is not going to hire the manager, and I'm not going to hire the manager. I want you to hire the manager. And so I said, okay, if that's the case, then my guy's Bobby Valentine. Bobby and I had played together in New York. We weren't regular players. We sat on the bench every day. Bobby second guessed every move Joe Torre made, but in a way where I knew that he was a brilliant baseball guy. He reminded me a little bit of Billy Martin in that regard. So I knew he'd be a terrific manager. And that was the first thing I did. And I had been on the job for a little bit, so I had a little more experience as a manager, as a general manager, than Bobby did as a manager. But, together we lasted a while, and Bobby was a perfect, as you well know, John, perfect manager for a young team. No one in the history of our franchise ever worked harder to promote this franchise than Bobby did. From morning until dusk, he breathed the Rangers and did a fantastic job. So you're exactly right, John. Bobby and Sandy were the most important people that I hired, and I don't think my tenure as a general manager would have been nearly 10 years without those two guys.
So just jumping ahead a little bit, and we've talked about this forever. The 5 years that we were blessed to have Nolan Ryan in Arlington are certainly one of the highlights of my long tenure. And I think you would probably have to agree. It was he kind of like fell into our laps in December of 1988. But just talk about that a little bit and what, in your opinion, it meant to the franchise. Because I think it may have, to me, it had a lot to do with getting that new ballpark built, and it may have saved us at the time.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. When people used to say Nolan Ryan saved the franchise, at first I said to myself, well, that's a little, I might be a little bit over the top. But as you look back on it and as you saw it unfold, it could very well have been the case. And as you said, John, we kind of fell into it when people introduce me and say, this is Tom Grieve, the man who signed Nolan Ryan. I almost cringe, because whoever had my job at the time would have done the exact same thing and the same result would have been there. It wasn't a stroke of genius. It was, as you said, being in the right place at the right time. But Nolan looked like he was going to leave Houston. John McMullen wasn't going to pay him what he was worth. I called Dick Moss, his agent, and said, if that's the case, put us on the list. We'd love to have him. Dick Moss says you're at the top of the list. Winter meetings, what was it, 1989, John?
88 in Atlanta.
1988 happened. We got in the same room with Nolan and Dick and Mike Stone and Bobby and I. Bobby and I had been jogging, and we had to just go right straight to the meeting. And it's not quite, it's a slight exaggeration only that we basically signed a contract and put it in front of Nolan and asked him to sign it. Number one, we knew the quality of guy he was, and we knew that he wanted to play here, and we knew that he was fair and the price would be fair. Now, it was a huge contract at the time, totally fair. After we signed him, Bobby and I went out into the hallway of that hotel and kind of simultaneously jumped up and high-fived each other, just like instead of a manager and a general manager, we were the fans that were going to be able to go out to the ballpark and watch Big Tex. But I have to say, and John, I'd be interested to see how you feel about this. At the time, it felt like an incredibly important decision. People said it was for PR, but that's not the case. We didn't have that kind of money to spend for PR.
No, we didn't.
This had to be spent on a player who could win. And John Young, our National League scout, said he still has the best stuff in the National League. He can still win, and so he could. But I think if I thought back to what my expectations and hopes were, that Nolan went beyond that and so much further that it was just unimaginable what he accomplished here. But you said, what did it do for the franchise? As you well know, it made us a respected team in baseball, not just on the nights where Nolan was pitching, but when he was in the dugout with a Ranger hat on. And our fans throughout the state of Texas and around the country said, you know what? If Nolan Ryan is good enough for the if the Texas Rangers are good enough for Nolan Ryan, then the Texas Rangers are good enough for us too. And I don't know numbers wise what it did for our fandom and what it did for our popularity, but there's no doubt that it happened because of Nolan.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, but I do think that because it had only been a year and a half earlier that Frank Morsani was going to move this team to Tampa. So it really did make a big difference in the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't experience this until well down the road, and the validity that Nolan brought to the organization. And listen, this was still an era, right, where if you got on ESPN on highlights that night, it was a big deal. There weren't the same number of outlets and shows about baseball every week and every night. And so Nolan put the Texas Rangers on the national conscience. And listen, I know that this predates me, but I think Tom can speak to this because he was running the whole operation, that so much of that was through John's hard work to put Nolan in a position to, for lack of a better term, optimize what the personality of Nolan Ryan was. It was a perfect fit for the Rangers. It was a perfect fit for the organization. And John saw that Nolan became, to quote something we used earlier, larger than life. What was your perspective on that, Tom?
Well, I guess I did. I was so wrapped up in the whole operation and everything. I might not have had this same perspective at the time, but I had the honor of giving the speech to induct John into the Rangers Hall of Fame. And one of the things I mentioned was the influence that John had on Nolan's career here and the way that he publicized 5,000 strikeouts, 300 wins, 6 or 7 no-hitters. He did put Nolan in the spotlight on a daily basis and deserves a lot of credit for that whole thing. So I would agree wholeheartedly.
All right, Tom, we're going to wrap up with a couple of real quick rapid-fire kind of questions, and these will put you on the spot a little bit, but you've had such a long tenure around this organization that I don't think that we can ignore this stuff. And we are also kind of just glossing over the fact that you're part of a multi-generational baseball family, with Ben having a very successful career in the big leagues as well. But let's go through a couple of things. What player or person had the most impact on your career in baseball?
Well, if I had to say the person that impacted my baseball career the most, I would go back to my high school coach, a guy named Buddy Pellerin, who was the first one that ever made me feel like I had a chance to be a ball player. Never occurred to me that I had this chance, and he pushed me, and he was a lot like a Billy Martin kind of a high school coach. So I would say him. He had probably as much influence as anybody.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit,
Okay.
too. And you may not be able to boil this down to two people here, but who would you say is the best Ranger position player and the best Ranger pitcher that this franchise in your long tenure has ever had? And that is a tough question, but I'm just kind of curious.
This is hard for me to say because Nolan was such a great pitcher here. But if I had to say who I thought the best pitcher who ever pitched for the Rangers was, I'd say Fergie Jenkins. I've never seen anyone pitch the way Fergie Jenkins pitched. Now, he wasn't as spectacular as Nolan. He didn't have the strikeouts. He didn't command the same kind of attention from our fans. But day in and day out, when it came to pitching, I would have to go with Fergie Jenkins. As far as a player, the best player I ever saw play for the Rangers, and it didn't last for 10 or 15 years, was Josh Hamilton. The time that Josh was here, I think he was the best player in baseball. I think there were stretches in his career. The one stretch when he was MVP, where he had the 3-month stretch where he hit well over 400. I think that it's very hard for me to imagine that any player in baseball, in the history of baseball, Willie Mays, Barry Bonds, you name it, played any better than Josh Hamilton did. All the things he could do on the field: run, throw, play center field, hit for power. He had the charisma that identified with our fans. So I'd go Fergie Jenkins and Josh Hamilton.
What is the most memorable Rangers moment for you? I mean, I'm assuming that you're going to mention the 2023 World Series, but you could go one beyond that if you'd like.
All right. I'm going to say this one because it popped into my head the minute you said that. It's probably not the most memorable moment in Ranger history, but I'm going to mention when Benji Molina hit for the cycle in Boston. That was, I still can't believe that it happened. You know, a lot of times while we're broadcasting a game, a guy comes up and he has 3/4 of the cycle, and we'll say he needs a single for a cycle or a home run. And in almost every case, it sounds like it's plausible and it could happen. But when Benji came up in whatever inning that was, John, the 8th or 9th inning in Fenway Park, and he needed a triple, I don't know if we said this, but we certainly thought it. Well, a single, a double, and a home run is pretty great, but he has zero chance. Not like 0.001 per chance of hitting a triple right now, but a 0% chance. And he hits this long fly ball to right center field in the corner out there, 420 feet away. The only place he could hit a ball and get a triple. The center fielder went back. I don't know if he fell down, but he had trouble getting the ball on a rebound, and somehow he came around. He came around second base for a triple, and I think I just laughed for about an inning after that. It was just so much fun to watch.
I think I had cracked wise to you before that at bat. When he hits a triple, John, I had said something stupid inside the Fenway Park press box. I remember that. And then it really might be, of all the things that I've witnessed, maybe the most fun singular moment on a baseball field with this organization. The 30-run game was amazing. Josh Hamilton's 4-home run game was a spectacular accomplishment.
For sure.
But to see Benji Molina end up with a cycle, you know, the guy who was universally considered the slowest man in baseball, to end up with that cycle in the middle of that magical 2010 season was just an amazing, amazing moment.
He went around second base. It looked like he said to himself, "Oh my God, I've got to go 90 more feet." But he made it. That was great. You're right.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Tom, we really appreciate your time today. Hope you're enjoying retirement. We see you around the ballpark some, and look forward certainly to seeing you at Elvis Andrus Hall of Fame induction later this month. So thanks for taking the time today.
I'll definitely be there for Elvis and John and Evan. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a illustrious group of people you're interviewing, and it's an honor for me to be part of it.
Oh, we couldn't have this podcast without you. We had to give you the biggest segment because nobody's got the history with the organization that you do.
Well, actually, I just began to get warmed up. So if you want to have part 2, just give me a holler.
I'm sure before it's all over with, we will.
Well, it's probably appropriate, as Tom Grieve was talking about the subject of this week's Archives in Arlington, and it happened on June 20th, 1991, and it was Pudge Rodriguez's Major League debut at Comiskey Park, and a lot of our fans, I'm sure, are very familiar with this story. He was playing at Double-A Tulsa, was supposed to get married that night between games of a doubleheader. He ended up going to the courthouse, getting married at 8:30 in the morning. Came to the big leagues in Chicago. Gino Petralli, who was the Rangers' regular catcher at the time, and that was the last time, went on the DL. He had back issues that put him out for 7 weeks. And at 19 years, 7 months, the third youngest position player ever to make his debut at the time in Rangers history, Rodriguez was in the lineup as the starting catcher, catching Kevin Brown, which was never an easy task because of the way Brownie's ball moved. Went 1 for 4 with a 2-run single in the 9th inning, threw out Joey Cora and Warren Newson attempting to steal, and the Rangers won 7-3. And one of the more things I remember about this was the post-game scrum in the clubhouse at Old Comiskey Park. At the time, Pudge spoke literally no English, and we were not at a position at that time, believe it or not, where we had interpreters. Now, today, everybody's got interpreters for everybody.
That's mandated, right? Every
right,
team's
it's
gotta have
mandated now.
an interpreter.
So, and I really had no plan, and it is probably on me. So I got one of our bullpen coach, Orlando Gomez, to come over and interpret for Pudge, who was, deer in the headlights almost coming up, because you certainly didn't get the that kind of publicity. He never had in Tulsa. He'd been in spring training and opened up, obviously, a ton of eyes. But it was at that point that I decided, we need somebody here to help with our Latin players. And we went on and Luis Mayorel, who was the first interpreter, and now every other club has it. And the second day, just taking this one step further, Pudge got Nolan Ryan, who was 44 at the time. It was the youngest catcher, oldest pitcher combo since Ed Kirkpatrick caught Art Fowler with the Angels in 1963. And, of course, the rest of the story, Evan, is history. Pudge never went back to the minors when Gino was activated. He started 81 of the last 102 games that year. And you came along later but got to see Pudge over the last number of years of his career. The thing I tell people most about what was the difference was the running game. I mean, we took it for granted for so many years. And when we traded for Einer Diaz to catch in 2003, it changed the whole picture.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Pudge shut down the running game. And that was the thing that stood out for me was, when I got here in 97 and he had already played 6 years in the big leagues and was approaching the potential of free agency before this big contract situation got resolved, where I think he went to Tom Schieffer, and Tom was
trading deadline. We're going to trade him to the Yankees.
Yeah, and Tom was very public about that, his answers to Pudge until they came to an agreement. But yeah, I mean, watching 6 years of Pudge throw guys out was simply amazing. I had covered Benito Santiago in '93 in Florida. And Benito was kind of closing in on the end of his dominance. He stuck around the big leagues for a while longer, but he was not the dominant thrower that he once was. And it was just a different game watching Pudge. I had a year of Charles Johnson in Florida, and Charles ended up winning a Gold Glove. But there was nobody who did it like Pudge and did it with the flair that he did. And then when he became the offensive force that he was in 99 and in 98 and 99, it was simply amazing.
Well, that's this week's show, and thank you for joining us for Sports Day Rangers.
Don't forget to check out more sports content from the Dallas Morning News and DallasNews.com. You can always find us in print. on the website at dallasnews.com and on the SportsDay Insider. My podcast with columnist Kevin Sherrington every week appears in the same SportsDay Insider feed. We have guests from the Dallas Morning News Sports Department. We talk about big issues and big stories and more Rangers talk on that podcast.
And if you have any questions for us, you can ask us on X, and we'll try to get some each week.
Thanks to Tom Grieve for joining us this week and for strolling us through multiple decades in Rangers history. We'll talk to you all next week. Take care, everybody.